All right, let's move on to our member segment. So a couple weeks ago, I sent out an email to the other co-hosts, and the idea I had was not exactly to do a Game Brain book club, but kind of unofficially maybe do it. I had read A Theory of Fun by Ralph Koster years ago, and it's a very simple book about the nature of fun and the nature of games that I felt was super accessible. And I thought, let's get other co-hosts to read this. Maybe I'll throw it out there if anybody wants to, like, engage with certain chapters from the book or whatever. And also, like, this could be a thing that game brainers out there could buy the book, read the book, and then we could have discussions on Facebook about it. So I sent out this email, and I feel like 5 minutes later, you responded.
I did, because the ideas. Well, first of all, I love reading,
Right.
and I don't know if I've heard you mention this book before, or mention books like it, but when I looked at it on Amazon, it seemed like it addressed certain very interesting topics. And when I started reading it, uh, I said, it's talking about things that were being addressed in the book that I was reading called The Hidden Spring, about the nature of consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and about the neurophysiology of consciousness, that came out either late last year or early this year. It's so hard to tell in a pandemic. That was written by Mark Solms, a big neurophysiologist, about, who's done 30 years of research, and I thought, oh, we could talk about that. I could talk about this. We call ourselves Game Brain, but we mostly talk about
Mm-hmm.
games. We don't really talk about brains. And here's an opportunity to
Right.
out, right? And talk about neurophysiology, and talk about consciousness, and talk about how brains work, but also answer some really practical questions, like, should you get rid of some games, or get a new shelf? Should you keep buying expansions and new editions? Should you keep trying to introduce your friend who doesn't like games to new games, hoping they'll find one that speaks to them? And all these questions have pretty decent, solid, uh, uh, Bayesian background calculations that will tell you how to answer them. You know, spoiler alert, it's the former, and yes, but we'll talk about why that is, and I think it'll be fun.
So yeah, like at the core of this book, A Theory of Fun is it goes straight at, like, what is fun, and like that's not an easy question, right? So when you made this connection to Hidden Spring, was part of that helping to, clarify in your mind, like, what is fun, or even like why do we play games? What's the thing that we get out of games when we play them?
Yes, for me, almost anything I do, and almost anything anybody does, satisfies a basic need,
Uh-huh.
a basic mental need, a basic emotional need. And uh, Ralph Koster talks about how it's fun for brains, that our brains are evolved and built to recognize patterns, and to seek and see patterns in nature. Uh, and for me, that's not a completely satisfying explanation, because seeking patterns is perception. But games, for me, fill an emotional need. And what emotion is it that games fulfill? And fun, for me, is not really an emotion, because an emotion when I feel an emotion, it's something I can just sit and experience. I can sit and
Right.
feel anger. I can sit and feel fear. I can sit and miss someone I love. But I can't sit and feel fun. Fun is something that I have to do something to have. The hidden
Well,
spring.
maybe hold on, expand on that, because like the expression we use, we if we were playing a game or we were together, Dimitri, I might say, "Are you having fun?" You're
Yeah.
sitting there, and are you having fun? And sometimes that answer would be
Yes,
yes.
yes. But having fun is a feeling that you get out of action, out of something being done to you, out of you being, out of you doing something. And emotions are something, feelings are, and I'm going to be technical here for a moment, qualia that are conscious signals of deeply rooted needs. And the need to have fun is boredom. So fun extinguishes the feeling of boredom. But again, I don't play games because I'm bored. I'm very seldom bored. I'm When I'm bored, I can read, I can watch a movie, I can talk to someone. Why do I specifically play a game? What is the emotional need that the game satisfies? That seems to be basic and evolved, and something I can maybe share with other mammals, the way that other mammals feel anger, the way they feel fear, the way they feel separation anxiety, the way they feel lust. What is it that we all have that games satisfy? What is that need that games fulfill? Um, and actually, there is an answer. There is an answer that
Okay,
I read about in the
let's hear
book.
it.
Yeah, so this is a Latvian researcher, Jaak Panskep, who discovered hardwired neuronal pathways in all mammals that correspond to seven basic emotions that all mammals have. Seven, of course, is a magical number, but this is actually verified. This is there's a little area deep in the brain, about the size of a guitar pick, the way I picture it, called the periaqueductal gray, that sends neurons into the cortex, and then the cortex sends back signals to the periaqueductal gray, and those hardwired loops light up when we feel emotions. And there's seven of those that dogs, humans, rats, bats, cats, dolphins all have: lust, anger, fear, disgust, separation anxiety, missing someone. We've all seen dogs outside of a cafe waiting for their owner. They're experiencing
Hmm.
loss, they're experiencing abandonment, um, seeking, and play. And I left
Play
seeking.
is an emotion.
Play is an emotion. Play, there
Okay.
is, so again, the idea is that there is some need, some deep internal drive, and I know it's Freudian, Freud is out of fashion, but this is not Freud talking about stupid things. This is Freud actually identifying basic building blocks of the mind. All animals play, all mammals play,
Hmm.
uh, people play, and it's an emotion that playing fulfills the need of social interaction, forming hierarchies, and experimenting with hierarchies. Uh, I'm a cowboy, you're the Indian. Now let's switch sides. And in play, uh, it never goes beyond 60-40 in terms of who dominates and who doesn't. Seeking is very interesting. Seeking is not something people talk about as an emotion, but it comes from the same emotional area that governs anger and lust and so on. And it's a very similar hardwired loop, and something you can see a dog do when they're in the backyard, sniffing around. Uh, the important thing is it's not really curiosity, because curiosity we think of as intellectual. This is a basic evolved emotional need to seek. Uh, and it's not looking for anything specific. It's not looking for a pattern. It's not hunting for prey. It's not gathering berries or pollen. It's just sniffing around, like a mouse or a dog.
Exploring.
We,
Also,
we've
yeah.
seen we've seen animals do it. It's also an evolved need, because when you're in a new environment, it pays off to seek and find maybe places to hide, or things to eat, or tracks of a predator that you need to get away from. It's a very basic need. Games fulfill that. Games
So maybe let me
combine.
bring this back to sorry, why don't I bring this back to what Raf Koster talks about in the book, and then you can kind of say maybe like where you diverge, because it seems like my understanding of what Raf, like if he has a basic thesis, he's kind of trying to drill down about like what fun is. I think he would say that, at the core of fun of playing a game is that learning is the drug. Like playing a game creates these, great endorphins in our brain where it's rewarding. But part of what's fun is the learning. And so if we are playing a game and and we're not learning from it anymore, it ceases to be fun. There's a reason in like the simplest example here is like when you're a little kid, tic-tac-toe is still fun because you haven't fully understood it yet. But as adults, we all understand tic-tac-toe. We're never going to lose a game of tic-tac-toe again in our lives. So we don't need to think about it anymore. And it no longer is going to produce fun. And so the question can then get a little more granular in terms of different experiences of like, when do we stop playing certain games? And I think his answer would be when we stop learning from them, that's the time to move on. What are you like? And I feel like your take is a little bit different here.
Yes, because I feel Coster is not wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but he's applying a teleological result to an internal drive. Uh, there are many things I know of that will benefit me. A walk in the park will benefit me. Uh, uh, Taking a class in real estate will benefit me. Uh, that kind of cost benefit analysis is very intellectual and behaviorist and economical, and not surprising, because people engage in cost benefit all the time. That's not why I play games. And I don't think that's why a lot of people listening to the podcast play games. I think we are driven to play games by an internal need, by an emotional need that needs to be satisfied. This drive, if we didn't have games, would drive us towards something else. It's not that games are a reward, it's that we have a drive to seek, we have a drive to play. And here's one thing that satisfies those two very basic, hardwired, built in emotions. Like the same way that when we love someone, arguably, it's a combination of lust and abandonment, which are also two very basic drives and emotions. I'm not gonna go out and do 1,000 different things just because they might benefit me. But if I am internally, emotionally driven by something to do something that satisfies that, and games happen to satisfy that need, I'm going to do it. And for me, while fun is what I have when that need is satisfied, the existence of that need, the neurophysiological structure that instantiates it, the evolutionary processes that build that need into me and other animals and other mammals that I can see. I can see a dog doing it. I can see a mouse doing it. I can see a lion doing it. I can see myself playing a game. That is a very compelling explanation. Jaak Panskep actually became convinced that all mammals were conscious and stopped performing experiments on them that caused them pain or displeasure or discomfort because of that. It, it's basically we spend so much time playing games that it would be silly to think that there isn't some inner internal built-in hardwired motivation. Uh, and here it is, and I'm
All
reading
right.
about.
Well, tell me what I'm not understanding, because like I would kind of like my perspective might be like as humans or as mammals or as animals, we are pleasure seeking. We're we like pleasure. Generally, we like lots of it. Uh, game players find a lot of pleasure in playing games. Like when you talk about needs, I almost feel like is part of when something's a need, then it can be satisfied. And when it comes to games, I don't feel like yes, I can find playing games satisfied, but I am not like that's not the end of it. I will probably just want more of it. Right?
Well,
It's not a need in that sense. Um where I'm like, okay, check, I've had my fun, moving on. It's more like we're always seeking pleasure, and it's just a question of where we find it, and like in different people are going to find that pleasure in different ways, and game players tend to get a lot more pleasure out of this learning experience. And I think then it's just a question of like when does that learning or when does that fun end. But it seems like you're saying no, this is still an emotion and it's a need.
uh, I find the emotional explanation more compelling for a number of reasons. One is very from a very simple evolutionary perspective. If an animal has evolved to seek pleasure, it's just not going to survive. An eagle will swoop down on it and tear it into shreds. Uh, I don't think that. I think pleasure is something that behaviorists and behavioral psychologists use as like punishment reward. I don't think punishment reward is uh, something that uh, actually governs our behavior as much as behaviorists think it does. I when I look at my life, when I look at the things that I do regularly on a daily basis, um, Noel Coward, he's a playwright and screenwriter from the 20s and 30s and 40s. He's a great wit. Said work is more fun than fun, and I find work pleasurable, of course, but I also find it tedious. and frustrating and very, very, very hard. And for me, why do I do it? Why do I write? Why do I talk to people? Why do I play games? Why do I go to see movies? Uh, it's because I have a deep internal need to do so. It's because I am self driven. Survival is a need. So, like, how do you know? How do you ensure survival? Which is what evolution is all about. Survival is not a prize that you get, and you don't get pleasure from survival. You don't know when you've
Oh, you
achieved.
might.
No, no, you don't know when you've achieved survival. It's an ongoing process. You don't know when you get to the end and you win survival. It's a process. You have to
Well,
be
you definitely have moments where you feel like you've dodged death or you've avoided threat. We all have moments of like, whoo, relief. There was a
oh, of
thing,
course,
and now
but
I
then
am
you give
done of
up.
it, and that's a pleasurable thing.
Yes, like when I dodge a car. That
Yes.
when I'm crossing a street, but we can't like that sigh of relief is gonna take a second, but we have to survive. We have to continue. We have to stay in homeostasis, in something that will allow us to live and breathe indefinitely until we stop. And you can't keep getting like Tom when he says that Vital Lacerda keeps giving you a cookie, keeps giving you a pellet. Like with every action, you keep getting a tiny little reward. Life is not like that. We could not have evolved we could not have evolved to. I love Vital Lacerda. He's the greatest game designer, much better than Yue. Suck it, Tom. But we could not have evolved to get a little pellet every time we survive, every time we take a step. That's not how it works. We had to evolve a drive to
No, but
do it.
the pellet, bringing it back to Raf Costa here, the pellet is learning. When Tom's talking about that cookie, it's like the designer is posing another question. There's another mental thing to engage on. There's a question that's being asked that a player, by experiencing the game, is engaging with and can possibly answer. So this is the subject of the book. I encourage people to engage with it, but I wanted to shift now a little bit to, like, we were talking about like why we play games and maybe the needs for it, but you specifically were raising the question of like when we stop.
Yes. And when you talk about learning,
Yeah.
uh, Ralph Koster makes the point that when we've learned the game, when we've learned everything we could about that game, we get bored and we move on. And there's, again, an interesting mechanism that explains that. Now, I think he calls it clustering.
Well,
Uh,
you'll have different words. You could call it chunking, or you could call it
okay, yes,
grokking.
that's right.
Grokking is specifically a term that gets used in game circles a lot. Yeah.
Right. He calls it chunking. Psychologists like Solms in The Hidden Spring call it consolidation. And I always think of consolidation as something that happens. I used to play a violin in my high school orchestra. Or I had a couple of small parts in plays. You learn your lines, you learn the notes, and the brain consolidates that so you can do that task unconsciously. You're not thinking about
Right.
what note I'm going to play next. You're not thinking about what am I going to say next
Or
in the
you might
scene.
not be thinking about what are your fingers doing on the frets, right? Like you're not thinking about, you're past that. It's
Exactly.
been automated.
And again, evolutionarily, that automation gives us a lot of advantages. It's much faster when a process is unconscious. It's much faster. than a conscious process. You're not thinking of where your fingers will go. Uh, an unconscious process is also more accurate because you're not thinking about it. You're much less likely to make a mistake. Your unconscious mind is faster and also more accurate. Also, a third point is it takes much less mental effort. It takes less energy. It burns fewer calories. Uh, so, at every opportunity, and again, this is in the hidden spring, and it's one of the paradoxes of consciousness and unconsciousness, is that even though we are thinking conscious beings, our brain is constantly trying to consolidate conscious processes into unconscious processes. That's what learning is.
Right.
As we get better at something, we stop thinking about it. When I was playing violin during my high school production of West Side Story, I wasn't thinking about what note I was going to play next. I wasn't even thinking about uh, the lust that Tony is feeling for Maria. I wasn't having feelings uh, because the process was unconscious and I felt it less. I didn't feel it. It was unconscious. It was below my awareness by definition. And this is a really good explanation for why games become less fun when we
But
learn.
your point in playing the violin, though, is like you're not saying you're bored of playing the violin. You're saying certain things have been automated or consolidated so that your brain is now moved on to other things that are engaging you.
Absolutely. The great professional musicians like Alfred Brendel or Mitsuko Uchida. Uh, Alfred Brendel doesn't have any emotion on his face when he's playing. He is invoking and arousing emotions in me listening to him, but he's not feeling emotional. Mitsuko Chido very famously has horrible expressions on her face when she's playing. She has weird faces. Whatever feelings are happening, that they're not really connected to the processes in the music. In performance arts, here's another example: Lin Manuel Miranda playing Hamilton. During performances of Hamilton, when he was off stage or when he was on stage but not mic'd, he was having conversations and sharing jokes with members of the cast. Uh, the emotions that you're communicating through your unconsciously learned actions, you don't feel anymore. Again, it's a paradox that once you've learned and once you've truly mastered something, uh, it's below your level of awareness. It's in your unconscious, and so it's not that fun. You can get fun out of other things. You can get fun out of communicating the emotion to an audience. And everyone who goes out on stage, like on Broadway, 8 times a week, says every performance of a play is different because every audience is different, and they're getting feedback. But they get the joy is from the feedback rather than from what you're doing. And this is something that you pointed out uh, because at game night, the joy is from the feedback that we may get from our fellow players.
Right. Like that's a lot of times the pleasures aren't in engaging with the game, it's engaging with the players. And the reference point for a lot of what Raf Koster's talking about can be a player his reference point tends to be more video games. So a lot of times it's about the player's relationship to the game. And I think one of the reasons we play board games is that this isn't simply the player's relationship to the game. It's like there's the part that we want to kind of consolidate from the game so we can get to the real game, which is playing with our friends. And all of that interactivity there. And that's why some games have high replayability and other games like, and it's probably why we're more dismissive of, and even using a dismissive term like multiplayer solitaire. Like we feel like the lessons of those kinds of games tend to be short, easily comprehended, and we're ready to move on. And that's not really what we're here for anyway. But let me bring this back to, or maybe, and then you can jump in if you want to make your other point. You gave the example of going and playing a game with Jennifer and Bruce, in which you won the game and you had applied a number of things that, in your opinion, you had consolidated.
Yes.
So is part of what you're saying that like that experience of playing with them generally like wasn't fun, or that the fun you had there almost had nothing to do with the games that you played yourself?
The fun had nothing to do with the game. And basically, we're all familiar with the term autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
I played those games on autopilot. I set certain settings, and then I just basically did it semi-consciously. I mean, there were brand new games, so it's not exactly
Sure.
like playing tic-tac-toe, but I engaged certain consolidated unconscious processes. And when a game is fully learned, or even before the game is fully learned, if it's enough like other games that you played, that's not really challenging you to
Right.
uh,
This presents nothing new. Like that's a problem with some games. You play this and you're like, I'm not feeling like there's anything
yeah,
new that I haven't already engaged with.
I know this. I know this. Ralph Koster would say, you're just not interested in it because you're not going to learn more, right? But I don't think I'm interested in learning. And by the way, a big
You're
intellectual.
deeply interested in learning. You're of course you're incredibly interested in learning.
I'm driven to learn.
Yes.
It's not about the learning itself. It's not about like the learning as an achievement. I have a drive that I recognize. And here, what's happening? There's again a neurophysiological explanation for why once you've mastered a game, it's not as fun because you've consolidated it. It's now become a mostly unconscious process, so you don't feel it as much. You don't feel the fun as much anymore. And so, go ahead.
No, just like maybe one distinction that I'm not sure I completely understand, or maybe that I'll take a slight issue with, is like in your example, you were able to kind of like identify, here's what I'm doing when playing these games. You know, like I'm gonna engine build this, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do that, and like you were able to actually like put labels on them, and that seems to me a little in conflict with your kind of definition of like when certain processes become unconscious. Like I understand like when I'm driving a car, processes have become unconscious. I'm no longer thinking about putting my right foot on the accelerator, or if I'm going to turn left, I'm going to pull my left hand down and push my right hand up. Like that's truly an unconscious process. You're describing more like there are certain lessons that you have learned that you are applying, and in fact, you can label these things. And I was thinking of the example of, for a long time in the last year, I was doing the two no touch puzzles in the New York Times. And I would say like I'm at a point of consolidation where those puzzles where I'm not saying that it doesn't feel like these are unconscious, but I've identified a set of rules that I can apply to those puzzles that will always result in a successful outcome now. So this game no longer provides a challenge for me. There still can be occasionally some pleasure in doing them and confirming, hey, you've successfully identified the rules that will successfully that will produce a successful result every time. Am I wrong to make a distinction between applying these rules and this being an unconscious process in your language?
Uh, you are not wrong, because as long as you can consciously identify it, your conscious mind is involved. But consolidation is happening.
Yeah.
You are taking a mental effort as a self aware game designer and game player to actually look at yourself thinking, to actually perceive what's happening in your mind in order to learn a lesson that you can apply in your game design and apply in your later gameplay. You are analytical that way. But if you weren't motivated to do that, if you weren't motivated to observe yourself thinking and putting labels on what you're doing and actually making unconscious processes conscious, you would just do them on autopilot. You would just do them automatically, and you'd actually get bored faster. Because in a lot of games that you play right now, your main interest is in the meta understanding of what's happening while you're playing the game rather than in the game itself.
Yeah, I think
And,
this is an important topic. When the games we decide not to play, ends up being as important as the decisions that we make to play games. Like we're doing this constantly of, whether it's in the form of a rating, but like there are games like, yeah, I'll play that game again, but I may not be excited about it. And some of that is that calculation of like, does this game still hold interesting questions for me? Like, is there fun there? Or has a game become rote? And I feel like this is in the realm that we're in all the time with Game Brain in terms of like, how do we, we're lazy. We want to be efficient in our use of time to get the maximum fun out of the time that we can devote to playing games. And we're
that's
making those decisions all the time.
and we need to make those decisions because we have a drive. We are driven to play these games that fulfill an emotional need for us. And although what I'm saying may seem abstruse and kind of, Dimitri, you're talking about brains, I'm also talking about games because there's certain very practical conclusions that fall out of this. Don't get a new shelf. Feel free to sell off that
Right.
game if you're not interested anymore. You've consolidated it. Your gameplay of it is unconscious. It's like driving a car for you. It's a perfectly natural process. Your evolved mind has done this to minimize your mental effort, to make you more accurate, to make you make those decisions faster. Completely natural. Get rid of it. Sell it off. Don't get a new shelf. On the other hand, do get the expansion, do get the
Ah,
new edition. Because what happens when you have to relearn a game or add a twist to a process that you've consolidated? It's not like you're like adding a coin to a piggy bank. You actually have to
right.
smash the piggy bank. You actually have to unconsolidate that unconscious process, relearn the game consciously, and then reconsolidate it. This is actually
Right.
what happens to our memories. Every time we try to remember something that happened to us, we actually bring the memory out of the unconscious or bring the memory out of where it's stored, reconstruct it, and then we remember what we reconstructed, not the memory itself. Be careful when you look
Yeah,
at
we
pictures.
rewrite it. Yeah.
We rewrite it. It's proven. It's 100% true. So be careful when you look at pictures on your phone and look at old posts on your Facebook. You're now remembering not the original incident, but the memory of remembering a memory of the memory of the memory of the incident. And it's the same thing with the consolidation of strategies. So, yes, it's worth it to buy an expansion. Yes, it's worth it to buy a new map of Age of Steam because you're now reconsolidating it. It's now fun again. It's now not completely unconscious. You can now feel it. And even when it also suggests that when you buy that new map of Age of Steam, you can play the old ones with more fun because they're not fully unconscious anymore.
Right.
They're
They're
more.
always breaking up those assumptions and things that we think that we've consolidated.
That's right. And finally, if I'm right, and I am right, and it's not just it's Yak
Got
Panskep,
that, folks?
it's Mark Solms, it's all these people who say everything that you do fulfills a basic drive. It's not just the prize that you get at the end of it, it's because you're driven internally to do so in a process that cannot be satisfied because it's always a struggle for survival. It's always a struggle to maintain homeostasis in your mind and your organism. So, yes, that friend who tells you they don't like games, they have the same drive that we do. We all have these same drives. We all have a drive to seek and play. They just haven't found the right one. Keep inviting them. They didn't like 20 games. They might like the 21st because this is a basic drive. This is a basic emotion. It is evolved. It is something we share with all mammals. So keep in mind, as long as they're willing to come, uh, there will be a game out there that will spark that for them. That will turn them on to games.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.